Welcome back to the Creative Living Podcast. I'm Rihanna Alvarado, and today we are talking about giving ourselves permission to pivot, to embrace multi-passions without guilt. So, I would consider myself a multi-passionate person and artist, and I have friends who would say the same. It's not as commonly talked about, I feel like, because I see other artists that are so good at like one thing and they've been doing it for 20 years. Maybe you've had an idea calling to you, but you're afraid of letting go of what you're already doing. Maybe what you're already doing is really working. And maybe this happens to you on a revolving basis. And so not only is your answer yes, but it's yes multiple times. Like, yes, I feel this all the time. I do this on a regular basis. Or maybe just plain confused, jumping from one excitement to the other without the commitment that every parent with a child in a sport is trying to instill, right? And yes, let's just say there is an unhealthy way that we can approach our uniquely multi-passionate approach to life. It's true. But the quicker and more deeply we come to peace with who we are and that it's okay and even needed in this world, the more chance we have to navigate our seemingly fickle interest with grace and purpose. So let me tell you a little bit about my most recent pivot. I am just coming out of the experiment of it all, and I feel my most freshest and clear to talk about this. But basically, I've spent the entire last year of 2024 following my gut, questioning myself and swatting away unhealthy conversations from loved ones. So here's me. I'm a homeschool mother and entrepreneur. I have worked part-time both in and outside of my home for about 10 years. Most recently and most ambitiously, when I was pregnant with my youngest, I got the idea to create a summer camp around art mediums for children 5 to 12. I got the idea and I just ran with it. I created an outline of topics and materials and I got to booking kids. I work with primarily children of my friends. With this first camp, which was so helpful for learning to work in this new way, teaching those outside of my family, because I've been teaching my kids homeschool, right? But then teaching kids that weren't my kids was a little different, and so it was so great to have the grace of friends' children to kind of experiment on. And I just fell in love. I loved it. I didn't know that I would love teaching in that way. I realized how fun it was to share my passion for art, and specifically creativity in general, with others. I should also say I began this as a way to fund self-publishing a book I had begun writing 6 years prior to that, off and on. So that's kind of why I got into this whole thing, is like I wanted to write a book. I was really thinking I wanted to self-publish it. And then I began digging into the research of how to do that and realized that I would really need thousands of dollars to do it the way I wanted to do it right, to do it successfully. And I was like, okay, I need a way to fund this. And so then I had this idea and then I began teaching and then I fell in love with it, and that love turned into an entire business. All of this really began to grow inside of this co-op that I was at with a good friend of mine, and she was doing gardening classes, and then she was like, hey, can you teach some art in there? And so we did a little bit of art with the classes, and so I began to kind of grow in confidence of me just as a teacher, just like kind of doing it. And then after that is whenever I did my summer camp, and then it just coincided that she was leaving. She'd moved out of town, and so could I then run her classes for her? And so me and another friend ran those classes, and then when that kind of was needing to change, I just ended up creating my own kind of version of what we were already doing in that co-op, but much, much more expanded and much more with this emphasis on creativity and nature and like merging the two. And it just created a whole new thing. And I called that thing Artforia Studio and Garden. So I ran a beta version of those classes in 2019 and then full versions in 2020. And I ran summer camps at a local college. And then I did that for 2 years. And then I started doing summer camps in my own studio area. And I was able to do that for 5 years and not get bored with it because it just included so many of my passions. So even though I'm a multi-passionate person and I usually can't stick to one thing, I was doing so much with this. I was writing curriculum, I was researching, I was of course getting to work with the kids, creating art projects with them, getting them in the dirt, teaching them hands-on gardening, doing nature studies. So we were learning about planets one time, learning about beasts another. Like, it was just so fun. It was so multifaceted in the creative endeavors and the creativity that it required in order to do this, that I definitely never got bored. So I was able to do this fully for 5 years. Now, I don't know what type of multi-passionate person you are, but through observation, I've learned that I am a seasonal one. And my hunch is that a lot of people are. So through observations of myself, I just began to notice that, man, I really only like sewing and only like doing handwork in the like fall, winter kind of period. Because by the time spring and summer comes along, I want to do something very physical. I don't want to go sit in the studio and on the sewing machine. But that's all I want to do in the wintertime. And a lot of my interests are like that, where they're very seasonal. But it took me years of observing that and then finally giving myself permission to be like, okay, you are allowed to have a room full of vintage fabric and only sew for 3 months out of the year, and sprinkled throughout the year a little bit, but like primarily during this time. That took a long time for me to be like, you can do that, because it just wasn't valid for me. I was like, okay, if you have a hobby or an interest or an art form, you need to be doing that all the time. And same with painting. I didn't always want to paint. It would just come in waves, and I'd want to paint for months at a time, and then I was like, I'd rather be writing right now, or I'd rather be learning a new skill right now. And so anyway, for me, in my artistic pursuits, they come in waves, and they also come just through the rhythm of the seasons. But these are the types of observations about ourselves that I think are really helpful to notice from a non-judgmental place, so that we can begin to work with our natural rhythms versus against them. With creativity, it's really important for us to feel safe and to feel free to move around and go through the different phases of creativity. I know Rick Rubin talks about this in his book, On Being Creative, I think it is. I'll link it below, but he talks about these different phases and the importance of going through all of them and not sticking to one, because some of us like to hang out over here and experimental. But regardless, when we're going through these phases, we need to have room to do all that stuff, and we need to feel safe to do it. And I feel like one of the ways we can do that is knowing how we work as a creative. And for me, that really looked like following the seasons of the year and allowing myself to be creative in whatever I was feeling in that moment based on the season. That's just me. Yours may look different. I can't think of another example off the top of my head, but it could just be that you get really interested in something for a while and you do that and then you switch it up. Whatever your thing is, just observing that without the judgment, so that you're free to work in those natural rhythms versus against them. So back to my story, I had mentioned that I was running those classes for 5 years, and then towards the end of 2023, I could kind of feel that a shift was happening and that something needed to change in a big way with my life and with the classes. And so one of my really good friends was teaching the younger kids in my class, and I was teaching the older kids. And so I had a conversation with her, and I was like, hey, I don't know what's happening, but I'm just like feeling like I might not be doing classes. I don't know, because I still love this, but then also I'm feeling this in my gut, and I usually go with my gut. A little context too, I had suffered a near burnout earlier that spring, just because I was going and going, layering things, and I was just way overextended and overwhelmed and stressed out, and I almost burnt out all the way. I didn't. I caught it soon, and then I was able to put some things in place and pick up some of the habits that God had told me to do years before again, and kind of reintegrate those into my life. And so I was able to catch it. But I think that was the beginning of me knowing that a shift needed to happen. There was a lot of things, a lot of signs, I'll say, that I could kind of see that, oh, the studio is going to be closing down. That was a hard thing to hear or to feel or to notice, because it was something I had like poured so much into, that I loved, that was well received by the community, that was incredible. All the memories, all the things that we did, it was really, really beautiful. So that was kind of hard, but at the same time, I've just made it a habit my entire life of following my gut. I know it, I hear it. And so I had this feeling, so we had that conversation, and we were just kind of going with it at that point, just trying to like figure out what would be the next step. Yeah, and some of the other things that were hard is that, this studio that we're in is really beautiful, and my husband designed it and he built it for me, and he invested a lot of his own money into it because he believed in me, and he still does. But so that was like, oh my gosh, so I'm just gonna like stop doing this thing that we built and put so much into. Really? That feels not right. So there was a lot of hard, introspective kind of conversation I had to have with myself to kind of get to, well, where is this coming from? So the other part of this is I still had debt from the business connected to building the studio and other things. So that was like, okay, I'm going to stop this business that's like paying for these bills right now just because I have a gut feeling. And I also had parents reaching out and saying things like, I've been watching you for years, just waiting for my kids to get old enough to go to classes. And then here I am saying, I'm not going to do classes anymore because my stomach is talking to me. It was just a lot to kind of hold and to bear. So this year, as I record this at the end of 2024, I just experimented. I worked at a friend's who was kind enough to teach me how to help out at her business, kind of float me along. I was also commissioned by her to do a really large mosaic kitchen backsplash for her commercial kitchen. It was a really fun, a really creative project. So I learned a new skill there. Learned how to cut tile and work with stained glass and stuff, and that was really fun. I also continued to design gardens. I also did garden consultations. That was all really fun and experimental, and the entire time that this is all happening, I'm just kind of processing. I'm just kind of slowly processing. I'm slowly digesting all of this. I'm slowly trying to figure out what the next thing is, because I know that a pivot is happening. It's in the process of happening, and then the next year is going to look really differently. And so that's what 2024 has been about for me. And so here I am at the end of 2024, and I'm restarting the podcast that I started in 2023, I believe, because I also really feel like that this podcast is the key to me being a better writer and person, in that I'm doing the great work of learning how to share. I've actually never been a really good sharer, been a great listener, never a great bearer of my soul, and that's still the case. I have a hard time being fake, and so if I don't feel like I can be authentic, then I just stay quiet, and it's nice. And so, but yet at the same time, I have all these feelings and all these thoughts and all of this wisdom, maybe, I don't know, maybe just experience that I want to share with others so that they can learn from it. Because some of the things I've learned, I teach my kids, and I'm like, man, if someone would have told me this, it would have saved me so much time, so much heartache. My heart is just to be able to share that with others so that they can learn from it and be encouraged and be inspired. Yeah, and for some time I've felt that part of my purpose is to share with others so that they don't feel alone or strange or wrong for the way that they are, to give them permission to be themselves. I have not felt like I had permission to be myself. And this is so silly, but like, for instance, I live in a small town, and when I would go to this bigger town, felt like I could dress like myself. I could wear, my silly earrings and my layered clothes or whatever. And I just felt like I could be more myself. I could say what I wanted to say, but here in town, I just kind of felt like I couldn't. Now, that is not anyone's fault but my own, taking full responsibility for that. It's just how I felt, right? It was just the thoughts that were in my head. But now, coming out of that, and also knowing that, hey, if I want to be a part of this purpose that I feel is inside of me, then I am going to learn to have to share. And I just think a big part of that is going to be sharing in this platform. I want to give mothers, anybody, but especially mothers, because I'm speaking to what I know, right? Permission to be creative in whatever ways they want to be creative. Creative cooking, creative cleaning, raising a family in general. I want to tell my younger self to keep reading, to keep writing, and to know that this is just a season. In the throes of motherhood, I often felt lost. Like I was no longer the person that I once was, who played with accessories and read fiction and loved writing. So that is why I want to talk a little bit about my story today, to say that it's okay to pivot. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay to not love something as much as you once did. In fact, I believe it's natural. Pivoting isn't failure, it's expansion. And as creatives, we yearn for expansion. That is why we find ourselves bored with things that used to light us up, because we're outgrowing them. In human design, if you're familiar with that, I'm a manifester, which means I'm a trailblazer. I'm designed to act independently, initiating new ideas and movements without needing external validation. I also have splenic authority, meaning my intuition and instincts are what guide me in the moment. Some people need time to make a decision. to cycle through emotions and to weigh everything out. But I have a tendency to make decisions quickly based on a sense of knowing what feels right or wrong. I just kind of like know in my gut. It might just feel peaceful right there in the moment. So in this situation, I knew I needed to pivot. I knew the moment that we sat down and I had that conversation at the end of 2023 that big things were happening, but I really had to take some time to let my head and my heart and my gut kind of work it out together, because there were people in my life that were very confused about that. But I knew it. And even though it was something that I still loved and I still believed in deeply and still saw the impact of so profoundly, I knew it was something that needed to shift. And I also knew that being in alignment was absolutely key. I was no longer in full alignment with it anymore. And just a quick side note, if you are not familiar with human design, I do highly encourage you, if you're feeling like any resonance at all or curiosity around that, to check it out, because I've tried a lot of different like modalities of like self-awareness and personality types, and I still use them. They're super fun. But when I found human design, nothing was as just like true to what I felt like I truly was. It just spoke to the core of me. And not only that, the way human design is designed, I don't know, it tells you, it gives you like specific ways and like modalities to follow to stay in your true alignment. It is just really cool. So I do highly recommend you check that out if you're feeling like interested or curious about that. Okay, so get into some practicals. I want to give you some clues for yourself to kind of help you figure out if it is time for you to pivot, or at least to consider it. Okay, because it's a big deal. Like pivoting can be a really big deal. It could be uprooting yourself from everything that you've known. So one thing would be lack of excitement. You feel drained instead of energized by your current project. Next one would be new ideas just keep calling. You can't stop thinking about another idea or direction. Okay, the third one would be growth stagnation. You feel like you've learned all you can in your current position and you're just like plateauing. And the fourth thing I would say is intuitive nudges. You feel a deep knowing that it's time to change, even though you can't explain it. So I feel like for me, just to kind of give a physical example, I definitely still had excitement in doing the studio. The main thing for me was the intuitive nudge. It was just a knowing, but I also had other things that did keep calling to me. One of which is this podcast and also YouTube and doing the course. Like all of those things. And they really all go together because they revolve around filming and having time to be able to film and do that. And running those classes, even though they were seasonal in the spring and the fall, and then I spent the entire year planning and writing the curriculum and ordering the materials and getting everything together and just maintaining the garden and planting stuff ahead of time. It was a lot, and it was a full-time, I don't know what it is, full part-time job on top of, homeschooling the kids. And I knew I could not do both. So for me, I had new ideas that were calling to me, and it also, more importantly, and the biggest of all, is I just kind of had this feeling in my gut of like something needs to change. But it's not from lack of excitement, and it's not from plateauing, in my case. Now, I want to kind of give this caveat. I mentioned this earlier, but I have been following my gut pretty much my entire life. Or at the very least, I knew what my gut was saying, and maybe I said no to it, but I knew what it was saying. So I've listened to that splenic authority my entire life. If you haven't, and this is new to you, to kind of like follow your own intuition or your own, however it's coming to you, own emotions around maybe pivoting, then I would definitely proceed with caution. Maybe have a practice of journaling or meditating or something like that around what you're going through. Definitely you could seek advice from friends and family or loved ones or books, but try to do a lot of this on your own, because I think it's easy to kind of outsource ideas from friends and family and books and podcasts and all these things. And absolutely, like, we get spoken through by all of those things for sure, but we want to be careful to not be like, okay, my friend gave me this advice and it's easy to say yes to that, and I don't have to do all this work now with myself and figuring out myself and observing myself and really being inquisitive with what I really want or what I'm really feeling or where I feel being led. I can just kind of outsource that to this person and their advice. So just a little word of caution there, because pivoting does not have to feel reckless. In fact, it should feel very intentional. So if you're driving a car, this just came to me, I don't know if it's a good analogy, but if you're driving a car and you're like, pivot, Dude, you didn't even look in your mirror. You could be sideswiping somebody. You could be heading for a ditch. Who knows what's going on? Instead, maybe we kind of get the nudge. We put on our blinker. We check all of our mirrors. And then we slowly turn. That would be the intentional way to pivot in this analogy. Some practical steps for pivoting creatively is permission first. Affirm that it's okay to change direction. Not that you necessarily need someone else's approval, but you need to trust your own knowing in this. And this will grow over time as you dance with this process and yourself. Number 2, reflect and realign. Identify what's working and what's no longer aligned. Maybe something just needs tweaking instead of walking away completely. That could absolutely be what you're feeling. So definitely reflect and realign. Create a transition plan. So break the pivot into manageable steps. So for example, I slowly closed the school and then slowly have been going into these other projects, right? Last year was kind of a gentle close where I still had some offerings, just not everything that I was offering previously. And then communicate your change. So be honest with your audience, your clients, your family, whoever it's affecting. Frame it as growth, not quitting, because that is exactly what it is, right? It is expansion. So journal work absolutely helps, as well as affirmations to help grow your courage with those around you, especially if you're not 100% certain. And then lastly, celebrate what you're leaving behind. Honor the chapter you're closing before diving into the next one. Too often we do all of these amazing things and then we dive into the next one. I am very, very guilty of this. This still is something that I'm actively working on. First of all, I don't want to feel like I'm bragging, and so I often am very shy to talk about myself in general, and I don't end up celebrating the accomplishments I make. Like that tile job that I did, I think I did a story about it, maybe a post on Instagram. I don't know how many people in my life even know that I did it besides, those that are really close to me. And it was really cool. I was really proud of it. I still am really proud of it. And it was really fun. But I just didn't want to feel like I was bragging. Not that that would be bragging. It's just sharing. Again, like stuff twisted in my head still. So this is something I'm definitely working on still. But just celebrating what you've done, what you've accomplished, honoring it before you jump on to the next thing. Because I will do this. I will finish a project and then I will just go to the next thing. And there's never any gratitude for what I've done for myself or for the project itself or for the things that I've learned or the skills that I've learned, any of it, none of it. I'm just on to the next thing. So don't do that. Close your eyes, acknowledge what you've done, and express your gratitude for what you've created. So to summarize, life moves in seasons and so does creativity. And that will reflect in your own life. Okay, that's all I have for today. And if you feel like you kind of work in seasons as well, hit me up, DM me, reach out, and maybe I'll do a whole episode on how to navigate seasonally through creativity. Yeah, I can share more about what that looks like for me and some of the tips and stuff that I'm learning in this new phase of how I can do things seasonally and also rhythmically, because as a manifester, I also have an energy that is very rhythmic. It's not consistent. And so I've had to kind of like learn how to work my creativity around that flow. So until next time.